Hello, Tim from Fair Play Now on the 17th of January 2025. So something that's come onto my radar only in the last week or so is a thing called the CAN bill, which stands for the Climate and Nature Bill, which is something that's going through Parliament at the moment. I believe it's in its second reading, and I heard about it in the comment section of something I watched last week, and since then I think a few people have been talking about it, but it's going on under many people's radar. Not many people are aware of this thing, but it's something we really do need to be aware of and be concerned about, because as one person or one group of people I saw how they put it, it's net zero on steroids. And reading through the blurb of what it's all about, that's certainly what it looks like to me. So what this climate and nature bill is aiming to do is to kind of marry up the whole climate change thing with nature and putting it together. Now, I obviously agree with protecting nature. I think mankind has far too much of a detrimental impact on the natural world, so you can't argue with that. But it's the first bit of it, the climate thing, that, as you know, if you're any kind of regular viewer here on this channel, I don't agree with. I think there's plenty of evidence out there to suggest that what the mainstream narrative is and what they're telling us isn't the whole picture, and it certainly is something that needs to be studied and talked about and discussed in a lot more detail before we start doing any of these serious things like net zero, and certainly like this climate and nature bill. But of course, any alternative viewpoints are rapidly closed down, and that really should make you suspicious, just that alone. Why can't people who don't agree with climate change or don't think it's a problem or as much of a problem as what's portrayed, why can't people like that have a voice in the mainstream media? And it really does smack of a cult thing, really. If you're not going to hear all sides of an argument, you're not sort of running anything sort of proper and serious. You're running a cult, as far as I can see. And I think that the whole climate thing is really an excuse to get communism into the country through the back door, and into every country, if they had their way, in through the back door, because it's going to be portrayed, or it is portrayed as, it's an emergency, we really need to take drastic action, and the only way we can do that is through overbearing centralised government with all kinds of drastic laws and policies. So what is that? That is communism, as far as I'm concerned. So the Climate and Nature Bill, apparently it was introduced way back in September 2020 by Caroline Lucas, who's the, I think there's a few more Green MPs now since the last general election here in the UK, but for quite a few years she was the only Green Party MP representing Brighton Pavilion, so sort of central Brighton and Hove, that town. And she's brought this in as a private member's bill, which is harder to sort of bring into an actual law than a government-led thing, but they can be brought into law, and apparently has close to 200 MPs supporting it, which is coming up for a third of all the MPs in the Houses of Parliament here in the UK, of course. So let's just go into this thing in a bit more detail. I'm looking at the site of zerohour.uk. They are sort of, it looks like they're very much into this thing, this climate and nature bill. But yeah, let's just have a look So in their blurb here, the introduction is saying the Climate and Nature Bill is a legally binding mission statement which will ensure policy and action on the climate and nature crisis, and it's science-led and people-orientated. The UK led the world with the Climate Change Act of 2008 and did so again with its commitment to net zero by 2050. In both cases, other countries followed our lead. The CAN bill would set a gold standard for other developed nations. By passing it, UK politicians would help inspire positive action across the world. And then it goes on, they've got this target of reducing global temperatures by 1.5 degrees centigrade. They keep banging on about this 1.5 degrees centigrade, and that is their target to reduce overall world temperatures by 1.5 degrees. So they are sort of saying, in effect, that the world is warming up, and even though it's now called climate change instead of global warming, they're concerned about temperatures rising and want to reduce temperatures, even though I can't see any evidence of sort of temperatures rising really, personally. Anyway, we have no chance of limiting warming to anywhere near safe levels unless we protect and actively restore nature, particularly the critical ecosystems that support life and store huge amounts of carbon, such as peatlands, woodlands, seas and wetlands, as well as our rivers and soils. So that's the introduction. Let's go on to their key proposals. If made law, the CAN bill would ensure that the UK creates a joined up plan. The crisis and climate and nature are deeply intertwined, requiring a plan that considers both together, cuts emissions in line with this 1.5 degrees centigrade thing, ensuring UK emissions are reduced rapidly for the last chance of limiting warming to 1.5 degrees centigrade. Or Celsius, I suppose I should be saying in this day and age, but showing my age there. But yeah, they're banging on about this global warming thing, even though there's not really any sign, if you look at the data, that global warming or an increase in global temperatures are actually happening. And even if they were, if you go way back in time, they're a lot lower now than they were in Roman times, for instance. I believe they actually had vineyards up in Yorkshire, as far north as Yorkshire here in the UK. We've got a few in the very southernmost reaches of the country now, but nowhere really that much further north than London. So I don't really hold that things are a lot warmer now than they have been in the past. And even if things were increasing, the third thing is, I don't really agree that it's down to us and what we're doing that's causing it, because there's so many factors that causes rises in global temperatures, solar activity being one of them, the oceans being another one. There's just so many other things, and what we do has a minimal impact. But anyway, let's carry on. That's what they want to do. They want to limit the warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius. So not only halts but also reverses the decline in nature, setting nature measurably on the path to recovery by 2030. There's that date, 2030, which is seems to be a key date in the whole plan of action for the powers that shouldn't be. I've banged on about this many times, as have many other people, but 2030 is a very key date in what they want to do, Agenda 2030 and all of that. And also another thing that really jumps out at me with this, the decline in nature. They want to help stop that and help nature recover. Well, they also want to reduce levels of CO2, of course. But what is CO2? It's plant food. If we had an increase in CO2, we would be helping the plants, which in turn would help all of the animals. If the plants are all thriving, animals would also thrive, and you know, that would really help nature as far as I can see. But anyway, that's just a little observation by yours truly. Takes responsibility for our overseas footprint, both emissions and ecological. Prioritises nature in decision making and ends fossil fuel production and imports as rapidly as possible. So that is really one of the most draconian things about this proposed climate and nature bill. They want to finish our production of fossil fuels and imports as rapidly as possible, it says here. So what's that going to do? Basically, it's going to send us back to pre-industrial times. This is the wording of something called the Together Declaration. Had an email through from them, which by the way contains templates for letters that you might care to write to your MP, whether they're one of the ones who supports this thing or aren't one of those. They've got options for both. I'll leave a link to that in the description box below so you can take a look at that. Anyway, it goes on to say, involving the public, giving people a say in finding a fair way forward through a climate and nature assembly. The government are going to have to listen to this climate and nature assembly, especially if they have a look at an issue or a series of issues, and if they vote in favour of something, you know, the proposal gets 66% support, I think they said, 2/3 support, the government will be duty bound under this climate and nature bill to actually take note and listen to that. So that's another worrying thing, really, although they do assure us further down in this document that Parliament and our democracy will take precedence and have final say. But yeah, introducing these new bodies, I did hear a quote, if the answer's more politicians or more people advising politicians in this case, then you're asking the wrong questions. So bear that one in mind. Anyway, so what's the fundamental principles of this CAN bill? The government must develop a strategy in consultation with the public via this climate and nature assembly, and the strategy must follow the following fundamental principles. Limit the UK's total CO2 emissions to no more than its proportionate share of the IPCC's remaining global carbon footprint for a 67% chance in limiting the heating to 1.5 degrees C. So we've got to reduce our CO2 emissions caused in the manufacture of the goods we import, and in line with UK territorial emissions, reduce the UK's emissions of methane and other greenhouse gases. We also have to ensure the end of exploration, extraction, export and import of fossil fuels by the UK as rapidly as possible. So yeah, that is probably the most worrying aspect of this bill, I would say, because again, as I said earlier, how are you going to do that without, you know, returning the UK to pre-industrial times effectively? Ensure that steps are taken to mitigate emissions and minimise damage to ecosystems, food and water availability and human health as far as possible. So I actually wouldn't sort of argue with that point. I think that our food and water availability and human health needs to be maintained. It could be argued, is that really the sort of end goal of the powers? It shouldn't be, but I'd point you in the direction of some of the wording here. ensure that steps taken to mitigate this. It actually says to minimise damage to those things, and so minimise, bit of a weasel word there, and as far as possible another set of weasel words as well. So they're not saying we're going to make absolutely certain that what we're going to be doing in this bill are going to minimise damage to our ecosystems, food and water availabilities and human health. It's not saying that it's going to absolutely 100% guarantee that damage to those isn't going to happen. It's saying that it's going to be minimised as far as possible. How much is as far as possible? Who knows? Your guess is as good as mine. So what I'll do, I'll just finish with developing a strategy, the Climate and Nature Assembly process, which is towards the bottom of this document from zerohour.uk. I'll leave a link to this in the description box below. I don't know if I've told you that before, but it will be there for you. So number one, the government must present an emergency strategy to Parliament within 12 months of passing the CAN bill, with annual interim targets to help us stay on track. Number two, formation of a Climate and Nature Assembly, which I've mentioned a little bit earlier, made up of a representative group of randomly selected UK citizens. So that is one good thing about it. It's not going to be just a load of so-called experts. So it's going to be ordinary UK citizens, and they must commence within 3 months of passing the bill. The formation of this thing. The Climate Change Committee and Joint Nature Conservation Committee must produce a review for the government listing proposed measures for inclusion in the strategy. It must include all recommendations of the Climate and Nature Assembly, which must have more than 66% support, unless there is an exceptional and compelling reason why not, which then must be stated in order that MPs can have a final say. So I don't know if I mentioned it, but somewhere in this document that I'm reading out here, they were saying that this assembly, okay, it's going to be headed up by ordinary UK citizens, but they're going to be advised by various experts and scientists. And after what's happened over the last few years, I don't know about you, but I haven't really got much faith in so-called experts and scientists. So, and I think, are they going to be just impartially advising these ordinary UK citizens, or is it all going to be very heavily propagandized and lots of pressure and influence put on these people to make sure they vote the right way? Call me jaded, but I kind of know how these things work by now, and I can see that happening within this assembly. The CCC and JNCC must report annually on progress against targets, and if we are not on track, the Secretary of State must revise the strategy or explain to Parliament why a revision isn't necessary. And finally, if the government fails to deliver a strategy that meets the bill's objectives and fundamental principles, breaching the duties imposed by the bill, the government can be challenged in the High Court through judicial review. So, I hope I've kind of explained what this thing's all about, why we should be concerned about it, and especially as almost a third of MPs seem to think this is a good idea. And we're already seeing the huge negative impact of net zero, and if this is going to be net zero on steroids, which you can see from just some of those things I've read out there that it will be. You need to get this on your radar, I would suggest. Write to your MP about it using the Togethers templates, and yeah, we need to nip this in the bud. And like I said earlier on, I think this kind of thing is just ways of getting communism into the UK through the back door. You know, I'm all about freedom. I'm all about preserving our way of life. Yes, we need to be careful that we don't damage nature irreparably, but you know, we also have to make sure that we don't sort of damage people's jobs, livelihoods and well-being irreparably either. We need to have some kind of sensible balance, and I don't think this CAN bill provides that sensible balance. So anyway, going to leave it there. Have a look through these things, which I'll leave in the description box below, both from 0 Hour and the Together organisation, and yeah, tell me what you think. Tim from Fair Play Now, thanks for watching.